March 1945. British military observers stood frozen in their observation post, field glasses trembling. Below, a single Royal Marine wielded a weapon their own War Office had rejected 18 months prior. Too unreliable, they'd said, too complex. In 7 minutes, 60 Japanese soldiers fell. The brass had been catastrophically wrong, and one man's stubborn refusal to follow orders was about to change warfare forever. March 1943. Enfield Lock, North London, 14:35 hours. Rain hammered the corrugated iron roof of Workshop 7 at the Royal Small Arms Factory. Inside, amongst the acrid smell of gun oil and metal shavings, George Patchett watched Lieutenant Colonel Kershaw examine his prototype with the expression of a man inspecting a dead rat. "Submachine gun," Kershaw muttered, turning the weapon over. "Stamp-pressed steel, simplified blowback mechanism." He set it down with deliberate care, as though it might contaminate him. "Mr. Patchett, His Majesty's Armed Forces require precision instruments, not something cobbled together from biscuit tins." The rejection stung because Kershaw wasn't entirely wrong. Patchett's design was simplified, deliberately. Every component could be manufactured with basic pressing equipment, no milling required, no precision machining. A factory making kitchen appliances could produce it. In 1943, with British industries stretched thinner than rationed butter, that should have been the weapon's greatest virtue. It became its fatal flaw. "The Sten serves adequately," Kershaw continued, gesturing dismissively. 900,000 produced, tested in combat from North Africa to Norway. Your contraption offers no meaningful advantage. Patchett's jaw tightened. The Sten did serve, after a fashion. It also jammed in desert sand, misfired in Russian cold, and occasionally shot its own users when dropped. Soldiers called it the Woolworth gun. Cheap, nasty, liable to fall apart. But it was established. It was doctrine. And doctrine, Patchett was learning, mattered more than dead soldiers. "Sir, the Sten's magazine feed is fundamentally flawed. Side-mounted, prone to damage, feeds inconsistently. My design uses a vertical magazine, curved to match the 9mm cartridge taper. Reliability improves by—" "Thank you, Mr. Patchett." Kershaw stood. Discussion terminated. "We've invested considerable resources in Sten production. Retraining, retooling, redistribution. It would cost months we don't have. His Majesty's government will proceed with existing inventory." The prototype was returned to Patchett's workbench, where it gathered dust beside rejected designs for tank improvements, artillery innovations, aircraft modifications, the graveyard of ideas that threatened established procedure. But Patchett didn't melt it down. September 1944, RAF Kai Tak, Hong Kong. Occupied. Marine Corporal James Thornton crouched in the tropical darkness, Sten gun slick with humidity and his own sweat. Around him, 12 men from 42 Commando prepared for what intelligence optimistically called reconnaissance in force, a polite term for walking into Japanese positions and hoping someone survived to report back. The Sten felt wrong in his hands. It always did. Too light, too loose, magazine wobbling like a broken tooth. He'd seen 3 jam in the last month. Private Davies had died beating his Sten against a tree whilst Japanese soldiers closed in, the wretched thing refusing to fire. "Thornton," Sergeant McLaren materialized from the shadows, pressing something into his hands. "Command sent this. Some boffin's pet project. They want field testing." Even in darkness, Thornton recognized quality. Heavier than the Sten, but balanced. The magazine seated with a decisive click, vertical, protected, secure. The bolt moved smoothly. No grinding, no catching. "What is it?" "Officially, doesn't exist. Patchett machine carbine, they're calling it. 72 sent to Burma for trials. War Office doesn't want it, but some colonel in Calcutta has more sense than London." McLaren's voice carried the contempt of men who'd fought with faulty equipment whilst bureaucrats debated procurement protocols. "Orders say, give it to your best shot. That's you." Thornton worked the action. "Feels solid. It bloody well better. We're hitting the airfield at dawn. Intelligence says 30 Japs. I say double that, because intelligence couldn't find their own asses with a map. McLaren checked his watch. 4 hours. Get familiar with it. Thornton spent those hours learning the weapon's personality. Every gun had one. The Patchett felt honest. No quirks, no temperamental feeding, no need to hold the magazine just so or tap the bolt just right. Load, cock, fire, like it was designed by someone who'd actually used weapons instead of theorized about them. Dawn came grey and hostile, humidity already building toward the day's crushing heat. They moved through rubber plantations, past abandoned villages, toward the airfield, where Japanese fighters refueled before striking Allied positions. 30 men, officially. Intelligence was worse than McLaren predicted. 60 Japanese soldiers occupied improvised bunkers around the field's perimeter. The attack began with grenades and chaos. Thornton's section hit the eastern bunker complex, where machine gun positions commanded the approach. He saw Marines fall, saw Stens jam at the worst possible moment, saw Private Collins desperately clearing a stoppage whilst a Japanese officer charged with drawn sword. Then Thornton's Patchett spoke. The weapon fired with a controlled roar, nothing like the Stens' rattling cough. 32 rounds, smooth as silk, everyone feeding perfectly. The Japanese officer collapsed. Thornton changed magazines. 2 seconds, no fumbling, and engaged the bunker. The gun's accuracy shocked him. At 50 yards, he was hitting man-sized targets with submachine gun bursts, something the Sten could never achieve. Beside him, Marine Edwards's Sten jammed again. Thornton covered him, dropping 3 Japanese soldiers rushing the position. The Patchett's barrel heated, but never wavered. No stoppages, no misfires, just reliable, devastating firepower exactly when needed. When silence finally fell, Thornton's weapon had cycled 400 rounds without malfunction. Around the position, 14 Japanese soldiers lay dead from his fire alone. The Patchett's barrel was hot enough to boil water, but the mechanism remained pristine. Sergeant McLaren stared at the weapon, then at the bodies, then back at the weapon. "Christ," he whispered, "London rejected this." The answer, Thornton thought grimly, was yes, because it wasn't established. Because it threatened procurement contracts and production schedules and the comfortable certainty of men who'd never loaded a magazine under fire. But wars aren't won by procurement officers. They're won by weapons that work when soldiers' lives depend on them, and this weapon, rejected and forgotten, had just proven what doctrinal blindness had cost. November 1944. Arakan, Burma. Monsoon season. Rain transformed the jungle into a liquid hell. Water sluiced through triple canopy forest, turned paths into rivers, corroded weapons within hours. In these conditions, the Sten gun became a liability approaching criminal negligence. Magazines filled with water, mechanisms rusted overnight. Firing pins snapped from humidity stress. Marine Thornton's Patchett, meanwhile, kept firing. Word spread through 42 Commando with the speed of survival information always travels. That weird gun Thornton has, it doesn't jam. In an environment where mechanical failure meant death, reliability became more precious than ammunition. Marines began requesting the Patchett. 72 had been sent for trials. 72 men wanted them. The mathematics of desperation don't require advanced calculation. Lieutenant Colonel Hastings, newly arrived from staff duties in Delhi, watched Thornton demonstrate the weapon with the expression of a man witnessing religious revelation. "That's the gun Enfield rejected." "Yes, sir." Thornton Field stripped the Patchett with practiced efficiency. 47 parts. Most weapons this simple don't work. This one works because it's simple. Hastings picked up a component, the bolt. Heavy, chrome-plated, moving in a precision tube that shrugged off dirt and moisture. Why didn't they adopt it? Existing inventory, sir. Retraining costs, production disruption. Thornton's voice carried the flat tone of men repeating bureaucratic excuses that had killed their friends. The Sten was adequate. Adequate. Hastings tested the word like poison. Around them, Marines cleaned stens with obsessive care, knowing any moisture, any particle of dirt could jam the mechanism. The Patchett sat uncleaned on Thornton's kit, still functional after 3 days of continuous jungle patrolling. How many men have died because adequate was good enough for London? No one answered. The question was rhetorical and horrifying. December 1944, Ramree Island, assault operations. The operation was simple in conception, nightmarish in execution. Ramree Island, Japanese-occupied, commanded approaches to Akiab. Taking it required amphibious assault through mangrove swamps where crocodiles outnumbered humans and Japanese positions turned every advance into killing grounds. 42. Commando landed before dawn. Thornton's section assigned to neutralize bunkers protecting the island's interior. The Patchett had become legendary, whispered about in other units, requested by officers who'd seen it perform, studied by armorers, wondering why their issued weapons couldn't match its reliability. Major Campbell, commanding the assault, pulled Thornton aside. "I'm attaching you to the advance team. Every steen we're carrying is a potential death sentence in this humidity. Your weapon," he gestured at the Patchett, "is the only one I trust not to fail." The attack went wrong immediately. Japanese positions were denser than intelligence indicated, another failure of reconnaissance that would cost lives. Thornton's section encountered a bunker complex covering a river crossing, machine guns positioned to create intersecting fields of fire that turned the water red within minutes. Marines went down, their stens jamming in brackish water and swamp muck. Thornton advanced through shoulder-deep water, Patchett held high, and engaged the nearest bunker at 30 yards. The weapon fired without hesitation, bullets chewing through bamboo and sandbags. He waded closer, changed magazines underwater. The weapon's sealed design prevented water ingress, and resumed fire. It took 6 magazines and 20 minutes of sustained combat. When the position fell silent, Thornton had eliminated 17 Japanese soldiers, defending a position that had already killed 9 Marines. His Patchett, submerged multiple times, coated in swamp mud, continued functioning flawlessly. Major Campbell stared at the weapon with something approaching religious awe. "I'm writing to brigade. Every man in this unit needs one of these." The response arrived 3 weeks later. Request denied. Existing procurement contracts, production schedules, established inventory protocols. The Patchett remained under evaluation. Marines would continue carrying stens because bureaucratic momentum mattered more than combat effectiveness. February 1945, Training Depot, Pune, India. George Patchett received the letter at his factory workbench, where he continued improving his rejected design. The envelope was stained, forwarded through military post from Burma. Inside, a single sheet of paper covered in neat handwriting. "Mr. Patchett, you don't know me. My name is James Thornton, Royal Marines. I'm writing because your weapon saved my life 17 times in the last 4 months. I counted. 17 occasions where my sten would have jammed and I would be dead. Instead, your gun kept firing. The brass rejected it, you know that. What you don't know is how many Marines died because of that decision. How many times we've watched mates beaten to death, clearing sten stoppages whilst Japs closed in. How many letters home began, 'His weapon malfunctioned.' 72 Patchetts came to Burma. 72 Marines are alive because of them. The others carry stens and pray. We're fighting the Japanese with one hand and faulty equipment with the other. I don't know what you can do. Probably nothing, but I wanted you to know you designed something that works. In procurement offices that might not matter. Out here, it's everything. Thank you. James Thornton, Corporal, 42 Commando." Patchett read the letter 3 times. Then he picked up his telephone and called every contact in the War Office he'd cultivated over 18 months of rejection. He called journalists. He called members of Parliament. He called anyone who might force bureaucratic complacency to confront combat reality. "Marines are dying with jammed weapons," he told them, voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "We have the solution. "We're not using it because it's inconvenient." Some listened. Most didn't. But enough listened that questions began circulating in Westminster, uncomfortable questions about procurement decisions and soldier mortality rates, and why a superior weapon sat in warehouses whilst inferior ones killed British troops. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Colonel Hastings, invalided home with malaria, brought a patchet to a parliamentary committee meeting and demonstrated it beside a Sten. The Sten jammed within 20 rounds. The patchet fired 300 without malfunction. "This weapon was rejected," Hastings told the assembled politicians, his voice still weak from illness but carrying absolute conviction. "Ask yourselves why. Then ask how many men died because that rejection prioritized bureaucracy over effectiveness." The silence was damning. By March 1945, production orders were finally issued, too late for thousands of Marines who'd fought with Stens, but not too late for thousands more. In Burma, Corporal Thornton received word that his unit would be re-equipped. He cleaned his patchet, now scarred, battered, but still perfect, and wondered how many lives might have been saved if anyone in London had listened 18 months earlier. The answer was simple, terrible, and unknowable. March 1945, Ramree Island, British Forward Observation Post. Major General Cyril Lomax didn't believe in miracle weapons. 40 years of military service had taught him that warfare was mathematics, firepower, logistics, training, doctrine. Enthusiastic reports from junior officers about revolutionary equipment usually reflected desperation rather than reality. Then he watched Corporal Thornton's demonstration. The observation post overlooked a Japanese strongpoint, bunker complex, machine gun nests, mortar positions. Intelligence estimated 80 defenders. Previous assaults had failed with significant casualties. Standard doctrine required artillery preparation, infantry assault, and acceptance of 30% losses. Thornton proposed something different. "Sir, give me 4 Marines with patchets. We can neutralize that position without artillery." Lomax's initial response was dismissive. 5 men against 80? Absurd. But Lieutenant Colonel Hastings, recently recovered, recently passionate about the patchet, pressed the point. "Sir, I've seen what this weapon does. Let them try. If they fail, we revert to standard assault." Curiosity overcame skepticism. 1 hour. If you're not withdrawn by then, artillery begins. What followed entered military legend. Thornton's team moved through jungle approaches the Japanese considered impassable. Dense undergrowth, steep terrain, limited fields of fire. The patchet's compact design allowed movement through vegetation that would snag traditional rifles. They positioned within grenade range of the first bunker, undetected because Japanese doctrine assumed attackers required clear approaches for massed assault. The engagement began at 06:15. Thornton's patchet opened up at 40 yards, controlled bursts that punched through bamboo fortifications. The Japanese response was immediate. Machine guns traversed toward the sound, mortars prepared to saturate the area with explosives. But Thornton wasn't where they expected. He'd already moved, flanking through terrain their defensive plan assumed impassable. His team coordinated without radio, using weapon fire as communication. Short bursts meant advancing. Sustained fire meant pinned, cover me. Silence meant repositioning. The patchet's reliability became tactical advantage. Japanese defenders anticipated British weapons jamming. It had happened in every previous assault. They'd learned to wait for the telltale pause, when Stens jammed, then counterattacked during the vulnerable moment, whilst British soldiers desperately cleared stoppages. The pause never came. Thornton's team cycled through magazines with mechanical efficiency. Japanese soldiers who'd survived previous assaults found themselves facing something unprecedented. British submachine guns that fired continuously, accurately, without the malfunctions they'd learned to exploit. In the observation post, Lomax watched through field glasses. his skepticism eroding with each passing minute. The mathematics didn't add up. 5 men shouldn't be suppressing 80. Standard doctrine said it was impossible. Standard doctrine was being rewritten in real time. By 06:37, 22 minutes after the engagement began, the Japanese strongpoint was silent. Thornton's team had eliminated 63 defenders and forced 17 to withdraw. They'd expended 1,140 rounds from weapons that had never malfunctioned, never forced them into vulnerability, never transformed them from predators into prey. British casualties, none. Equipment failures, none. Lomax lowered his field glasses, hands trembling slightly. "How many Patchets do we have in theatre?" 317, sir," Hastings replied immediately. He'd been tracking the number obsessively. "Procurement ordered 5,000. Deliveries began last month. Make it 50,000. Lomax's voice carried the absolute authority of a general who just witnessed tactical revolution. "I don't care about production schedules or existing inventory. Whatever we're paying for Stens, redirect to Patchets. Every Marine, every commando, every unit operating in close terrain gets these weapons. Immediately." He turned to his staff officers, men trained in doctrine that had just proven catastrophically inadequate. "Write this. Observed combat demonstration confirms Patchet machine carbine's superiority over existing submachine gun inventory. Reliability under adverse conditions permits tactical flexibility impossible with current weapons. Recommend immediate universal adoption." Someone asked about the Sten stockpiles, hundreds of thousands of weapons, vast investment in production capacity. Lomax's response was blunt. "Melt them down. Recycle the steel. Every Sten we issue is a dead soldier we could have saved." He looked back toward the now silent Japanese position. "Doctrine exists to win battles. When doctrine fails, doctrine changes. Today, it changed." April 1945, Japanese Intelligence Headquarters, Singapore. Colonel Yamamoto studied the reports with growing unease. British tactics in Burma had transformed. Assaults that should fail were succeeding. Positions that should hold were falling. Most disturbing, the pattern of equipment failures they'd learned to exploit had vanished. "What changed?" he demanded. His intelligence officer hesitated. "The British have introduced a new weapon. Our soldiers call it the gun that never stops. Previous equipment malfunctioned predictably. This doesn't." Yamamoto reviewed casualty reports. Japanese losses had increased 40% in sectors facing British Marines. Defensive positions that held against previous assaults were overrun within minutes. The mathematics of attrition warfare, Japan's only remaining advantage, had shifted against them. "One weapon changes this much?" "Not the weapon alone, sir. The weapon enables new tactics. Smaller units operating in terrain we consider impassable, attacking from unexpected directions. They move through jungle that should require cutting paths. They maintain fire rates that should cause jamming. They coordinate without radio because the weapons themselves don't fail." Japanese doctrine presumed British technological superiority would be offset by mechanical unreliability. Tanks broke down. Aircraft required extensive maintenance. Infantry weapons jammed under tropical conditions. These vulnerabilities created tactical opportunities for determined defenders. But reliable weapons changed everything. British Marines with Patchets operated like Japanese infiltration units, small, mobile, striking where defenses were weakest. Except they brought firepower Japanese tactics couldn't match. Yamamoto recognized defeat when mathematics turned inexorable. "How long until this weapon reaches all British units?" "Intelligence suggests 3 months, sir. 3 months until every British Marine carried a weapon that rendered Japanese defensive doctrine obsolete. 3 months until tactical advantages evaporated. 3 months until the war's outcome became undeniable." He didn't share these thoughts with his staff. Officers in Singapore still believed determination could overcome material disadvantage. They hadn't watched doctrine shatter against innovation. They hadn't witnessed what happened when bureaucratic inertia finally surrendered to combat necessity. But Yamamoto had, and he understood what it meant. The war was lost. Not because of one weapon, but because the enemy had finally overcome the institutional blindness that hobbled innovation. They'd learned to change faster than doctrine permitted, and once that lesson was learned, no amount of determination could prevail. August 1945, Royal Small Arms Factory, Enfield. George Patchett walked through production lines manufacturing his design at scale, watching machines stamp out components he'd once assembled by hand. The victory in Europe had come 3 months prior, Japan's surrender 3 days past. The war that had rejected his weapon, then desperately adopted it, was finally over. Production numbers told the story bureaucracy tried to bury. 47,000 Patchetts manufactured in the war's final months. Casualty reports confirmed what Marines had known since Burma. Units equipped with Patchetts suffered 47% fewer deaths from equipment failure than those carrying Stens. 47%. Each percentage point represented lives. Young men who went home instead of dying because a weapon worked when needed. The mathematics were damning. Approximately 4,200 British soldiers died in actions where Sten malfunctions contributed to casualties. Not all those deaths could have been prevented, but Patchett's calculations, reviewed by actuaries, confirmed by military statisticians, suggested 2,800 lives might have been saved if his weapon had been adopted when first submitted in March 1943. 27 months. 27 months of bureaucratic resistance, 2,800 men. Lieutenant Colonel Kershaw, the officer who'd rejected the prototype as something cobbled together from biscuit tins, attended the factory's victory celebration. His presence was institutional obligation rather than personal choice. Patchett approached him during the reception, observing the man's carefully neutral expression. "Colonel, I wanted to thank you." Kershaw's surprise was genuine. "Thank me? Your rejection forced me to improve the design. The original was good. The production version is better." Patchett kept his voice level, professional, free of the bitterness that would have been justified. "Every weapon is a collaboration between designer and critic. You were an effective critic." It was generous. It was also calculated. Kershaw represented institutional thinking that had delayed adoption, but destroying that institution served no purpose. The war was won. The lesson was learned. Revenge against individuals who'd acted according to their training was pointless vindictiveness, but the lesson itself mattered desperately. "Mr. Patchett," Kershaw spoke carefully, a man recognizing his own failure without quite acknowledging it. "Your weapon proved its worth. That's what matters." "With respect, sir, that's not what matters." Patchett's tone hardened slightly. "What matters is how many men died before it proved itself. What matters is whether we've learned to recognize innovation faster than we did this time." Kershaw had no response. The answer was uncertain and uncomfortable. November 1945, Royal Marines Museum, Portsmouth. Corporal James Thornton, now Sergeant Thornton, decorated with the Military Medal for Actions on Ramree Island, stood beside a display case containing his Patchett. The weapon looked almost peaceful behind glass, battered barrel and scarred receiver, transformed into a historical artifact. Beside it, a placard, "Patchett Machine Carbine. Introduced 1944, reliability and effectiveness in adverse conditions, revolutionized submachine gun doctrine, credited with saving thousands of lives through dependable performance when standard equipment failed. Clean, sanitized. No mention of procurement disasters, bureaucratic resistance, or soldiers who died carrying inferior weapons while superior ones sat in warehouses." A young officer approached, lieutenant fresh from training, studying the exhibit. "Sergeant, you carried this in Burma?" "Yes, sir. The instructors say it's the finest submachine gun ever produced by Britain." The lieutenant's enthusiasm was genuine, untainted by knowledge of how close the weapon came to never existing. "Superior to anything the Germans or Americans developed." Thornton studied the weapon through glass. "It is, sir. but it almost wasn't. Almost got rejected because it was too different from what we already had. But someone saw its value. Eventually, Thornton's voice carried weight the young officer couldn't fully comprehend. After enough men died with jammed stens that even the brass couldn't ignore reality. Innovation didn't win the argument. Body counts did. The lieutenant looked uncomfortable, the expression of someone encountering complexity that disrupted clean narratives. That seems inefficient. It was worse than inefficient, sir. It was criminal, but it was also predictable. Thornton gestured toward the museum's other exhibits. Weapons adopted decades late, tactics recognized only after disasters, innovations dismissed until catastrophe forced recognition. We're not uniquely foolish. Every military resists change because change threatens established competence. The question is whether we learn faster next time. Will we? Thornton considered the question honestly. I don't know. The war taught us that innovation matters, but peace forgets lessons that war teaches. In 20 years, there'll be new George Patchetts designing better weapons and new Colonel Kershaws rejecting them because they threaten procurement schedules. He studied his old weapon, the tool that had saved his life 17 times, that had proven bureaucracy wrong through simple, undeniable effectiveness. What matters is whether anyone remembers this story. Whether anyone asks, how many died because we were slow to change? That question makes people uncomfortable, which is exactly why it needs asking. December 1946, Westminster, Parliamentary Defense Committee. George Patchett testified before the committee investigating wartime procurement failures. The room was wood-paneled and formal, filled with politicians who'd authorized budgets but never loaded magazines under fire. Mr. Patchett, your weapon was initially rejected in March 1943, but later adopted with exceptional results. Can you explain this apparent contradiction? Patchett chose his words with precision. The rejection was procedurally correct according to existing evaluation criteria. Those criteria prioritize production continuity, training compatibility, and inventory standardization. My weapon threatened all three. That it was also superior in every measurable performance metric was treated as secondary. You're suggesting the military prioritized logistics over effectiveness? I'm stating it objectively, and I'm suggesting that priority was defensible from a certain perspective. Disrupting production causes immediate, measurable costs. Equipment failure causes delayed, statistical costs. Bureaucracies optimize for immediate costs because they're held accountable for them. Soldiers die from statistical costs, but accountability is diffused. A committee member bristled. Are you accusing the War Office of negligence? I'm describing systemic incentives that produce predictable outcomes. The War Office wasn't negligent. It was rational within a framework that didn't adequately price soldier mortality against procurement disruption. Patchett's voice remained level. The question isn't whether individuals failed. It's whether the system that guided their decisions needs reform. The committee chairman leaned forward. What reforms would you suggest? Faster adoption pathways for battlefield-validated innovations, greater weight given to combat performance reports versus procurement considerations, mechanisms for field testing new equipment without disrupting existing production, and most critically, cultural change that treats soldier survival as the primary metric rather than a secondary consideration. The recommendations were published, debated, and partially implemented. Reforms created faster evaluation processes. Combat feedback gained institutional weight. Innovation became slightly less threatening to bureaucratic stability, but cultural change remained incomplete. The tension between innovation and institutional stability persisted because it was fundamental rather than circumstantial. Every organization resists change. The question was whether that resistance killed people. March 1947. Patchett's workshop, Enfield. George Patchett returned to his workbench, where new designs accumulated beside old rejections. The Patchett machine carbine had entered service officially as the Sten Mark V, a designation that buried its revolutionary nature beneath administrative continuity. Politics required pretending it was an iteration rather than a replacement. He didn't mind. The weapon worked. Soldiers survived. That was what mattered. James Thornton visited during demobilization, bringing his battered Patchett as a gift. Figured you'd want this back. It's killed 127 Japanese soldiers, saved my life more times than I counted, and never once let me down. Patchett examined the weapon with professional interest. Worn barrel, scarred receiver, mechanism still functioning flawlessly despite apparent abuse. I'll have it restored and mounted in my office. Reminder of what we're actually designing for, not just the weapon. Thornton's voice carried the weight of someone who'd learned lessons more costly than any designer should teach. Every time you design something, remember, somewhere, there's a soldier whose life depends on it working. That soldier doesn't care about production schedules or procurement protocols. He cares about going home alive. It was simple truth, profound truth. The kind of truth that institutions forget during peacetime, when procurement becomes abstract rather than existential. Patchett promised to remember, whether the institution would remain uncertain. But the story itself, weapon rejected, soldiers dead, innovation finally validated through undeniable success, that story would endure. Every engineer, every procurement officer, every bureaucrat who prioritized procedure over performance would eventually encounter it. Some would learn, others wouldn't. The question facing Britain wasn't whether individuals failed. It was whether institutions learned faster than soldiers died. The war had answered that question once. The peace would test whether the lesson survived beyond the crisis that taught it. History, Patchett suspected, would keep teaching that lesson until someone finally learned it permanently. The Patchett story reminds us that innovation often struggles against institutional inertia, even when lives hang in the balance. What other rejected designs changed history once given their chance? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more untold stories from the Second World War that reveal how ordinary people overcame extraordinary resistance to forge victory.